How do you discover and search for available nonprofit grants? How do you identify which grants might be a good fit for your nonprofit organization? And how do you assess which grants are going to be worth your time to apply for in the first place? A while ago, I teamed up with grants expert Rachel Fiedler-Cannella from Instrumentl to host a webinar to answer those questions. But if you missed it, have no fear. We are showing that webinar replay here in this video. And hey, if you're watching this and we haven't met before, I'm Amber Melanie Smith. I'm a nonprofit founder, social entrepreneur, and social impact YouTuber with a mission of helping equip changemakers to make a difference, whether that's through starting and growing successful nonprofits, social enterprises, leadership, and more. Be sure to check out my new website, changemakercafe.com, where I have all of my current content organized in neat little links so you can find the exact topic you're looking for. Without further ado, let's get into this webinar replay. All right, let's get into what our agenda looks like today. I'm going to do a quick overview of how to engage in this webinar, some housekeeping things there. Then I'm going to turn it over to our expert, Rachel, to talk about finding grants that fit and how do we do that? How do we figure out which grants are going to be the best ROI, the most likely to be a good fit for our organizations? And then there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. And I just want to say, I especially wanted to partner with Rachel because of her background in the nonprofit world. You know, there's nothing like having been there and knowing what it's like, just like you all. And also because I know that Instrumentl is a great resource, and I'm very happy to have you all generously showing us how to do this. So let's jump right into that housekeeping stuff. If you haven't done a Zoom webinar before, here's a little bit about how to use the Q&A function. And I do see a couple of you already using it, so great job there. There should be a little bubble down at the bottom that says Q&A. If at any point you have a question that you'd like us to make sure we try to address during the Q&A portion of this webinar, just open it up and drop in your question, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can throughout this session. Okay. All right, before I turn it over to Rachel, I'm going to just kind of cover a little bit about grants as a fundraising strategy. And the reason for this is because we know that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for fundraising when it comes to nonprofits. Every organization has a unique mission, has unique strengths and assets. And so it's really important to think of grants as a strategy, as part of a larger strategy too. When we think about grants as a strategy, there are many pros to including grants as part of your strategy. For one, we know that grants can be sometimes significant amounts of funding. And having a grant partnership with a foundation or a major funder can also lend a bit of credibility to your organization, especially if they're one of the first funders you've had and you're getting up and running and starting to build your reputation as an organization. So having that partnership shows the community, wow, this organization, this funder believes in us, so you should too, and also fund us as well. Grants have the potential to build capacity. You know, we talk a lot in the nonprofit world about needing to cover our operational costs, cover our infrastructure needs, our capital needs. In addition to covering our program needs, it's really important that we think of the full cost of what it takes to do this really important social impact work and account for all of those needs in our grant search and our grant writing. Unlike loans, grants have no obligation to repay, so they are just like contributions from an individual, except they typically come from an institution, funder, et cetera, or foundation, et cetera. And when you can get grants, especially those magical multi-year grants, and I know that I've seen some of those around on the internet as well, it can really empower your team to do some long-term planning. There's nothing like knowing you have 3 years worth of funding coming your way that's promised to allow you to think really strategically about the social and community problems that you're trying to solve and how this funding can facilitate making that impact. So those are the benefits of grant funding. There are some challenges though, which is why we wanted to have this particular webinar so that we could be sure that we are helping you mitigate those challenges. Now, grants can be competitive. Oftentimes grant funders receive a lot of applicants, and they can't unfortunately give money to everyone all the time as much as we wish that they could. Grants can sometimes include restrictions. We'll talk about eligibility requirements when Rachel has her turn, but making sure that those restrictions are not going to prohibit your organization from participating. Sometimes grants might not be available long-term. Sometimes funders prefer to provide you the resources to get something up and running, but then not be your perpetual funder. And then sometimes applying can be time-consuming, or the grants are not your exclusive source of funding. And so for all of those reasons, it's really, really important that we make sure that when we're looking for grants and applying for grants, that we're finding the grants that are going to be most successful for our organizations. So with all of that said, I'm going to open a Zoom poll real quick, and I'd just love to have you all drop your thoughts into here. And we're going to take a look at what you all have to say about this. When we opened the registration for this webinar, I did ask you optionally to input what some of your biggest challenges were when it comes to grants. And this poll sort of represents some of the top challenges we know exist. We've got knowing where to look for grants, knowing if a grant is the right fit, and assessing if a grant application is worth our time. And I'm going to show you these results, but it's really interesting seeing them all come in. Right now, we're at about 50% of you are saying knowing where to look for grants is the top problem, followed by assessing if a grant application is worth our time. Take just another minute to respond here. Got just a couple more people. Okay. All right. I think we are coming to some solid conclusions here. So I'm ending the poll and I'm sharing the results. Hopefully you all can now see those. But we landed approximately where I said. About half of you said top challenge is just where to look. And then a third of you noted assessing if a grant is worth your time. And then finally, knowing if a grant is the right fit. Rachel, I'm just curious, is this in line with what you all see over there too?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely that knowing where to look is often kind of one of the biggest challenges. And then, yeah, that assessment that can sometimes kind of fit into the knowing if the grant is the right fit too, right? Like how you're determining that assessment of the go or no go for a certain application.
Yeah. Okay. And if you're curious what some of the top responses were when you all optionally submitted your comments during registration, it aligns fairly well, knowing which grants are the greatest likelihood of success, creating compelling grant requests, how to find grants in our very specific organization niche, how to even begin searching for grants. That's what we just saw in the poll. And then finding grants that support capacity and general operations. I hear you on that one. Okay, so moving forward, I just want to do a quick reminder for folks to, anytime throughout this session, go ahead and drop your questions into the Q&A. We won't be able to get to them right this second, but we have time allotted at the end of Rachel's portion to go ahead and answer as many of those questions as possible. So if you have a question and you'd like us to try to address it, don't forget to drop it in there. Okay, well, at this point, Rachel, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn over the reins to you.
Awesome. And if you don't
And
mind giving me that, yeah, co-host capabilities, I'll do a little switcheroo.
there you go. Rachel, you are now the host. I will address some of the comments I'm seeing while you're doing that. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. We will send out the recording afterward to those who registered. Yes. Okay. Awesome. 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 All right. Rachel, you ready to go?
I am.
Take it away.
Great. So yeah, I mean, applying some of those challenges that we just talked about in the Zoom poll, I want to help set us up for finding grants that fit. That's a big question that we want to be sure we're able to answer before we spend a ton of time working on any applications or even moving forward with a particular funder, right? And how we do that is what I'll be kind of diving in deeper on in just a second. But I'm curious just to hear from folks in the chat box. We did a survey with grant writers last year, and they told us how much time on average they spend writing one grant. I'm curious just to hear in the chat box, what do you guess the biggest chunk of folks said for the time that it takes for them to write one grant? Is it less than 10 hours, 10 to 20, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, or more than 40 hours for one grant? Okay, I'm seeing some good guesses come in. Oh yeah, okay, we've got a whole range, and some people definitely saying the 40 and more. Absolutely. Depends on the size. Yes, you're right, Suzanne, it absolutely does. And yes, it depends on the grant type. Good guesses here. I should have had some prizes for folks who got a right answer here. So based on our survey from last year, this is with 76 grant writers, so a small sample size, but I think we could probably relate to some of these metrics if we think about examples of our past grant writing experience. The largest chunk of folks said that one grant takes them 10 to 20 hours. 41% of folks said that. But I want to highlight the fact that predominantly everyone said, this is over 3/4 of the group said it takes between 10 and 40 plus hours for one grant. So I highlight this to just say we want to make sure we're spending our time effectively. We want to use our time well, and if we're going to spend 40 plus hours on one grant, we should make sure that it really works for our organization and our specific funding needs. I agree, Amber. 20 hours still does feel like too much. There's probably some ways I could dive a whole other webinar about how we could kind of synthesize some of that and make ourselves save some time there, but that'll be for another topic. So a couple key things I want to highlight when we're looking for funding opportunities, we want to make sure we really understand our funder. We want to get in the shoes of the funder and make sure we have alignment on a couple of key stats here. And so I've listed this here. I encourage you to screenshot this slide. Think about how you might use this when you're doing your independent prospecting or looking for funders. But these are the 6 things I'm going to highlight here. We want to make sure we understand the grant maker's mission, right? Our organization is saying to the funder, we are the organization that can advance your mission in the community. In order to do that, there has to be mission alignment. So we want to make sure we understand the grant maker's mission. We also want to get a sense of the statistics on giving patterns. Now, I'll talk a little more about how we can find out all this information, right? But we want to have a sense of how they've given in the past. That also goes into this third point, giving trends and cycles over the years. We want to see where have they funded. What types of funding are they giving? Is it for capital projects, for capacity building? We want to see evidence that they're giving towards project areas that we actually are looking for. We want to see data on past grantees and funded projects, right? That gives us a great indication. Say you have another organization in your community that's serving seniors and you want to see that they're funding similar causes to yours, right? So looking at that data is super, super valuable. You want to see your geographic area of focus represented. If you are based in California, like myself, and you're looking for funding for LA County and they've never even given in California once ever, that might be a little bit of a stretch, right? So we want to make sure we're getting a sense of the background research there. And lastly, Amber mentioned this, but probably the most important thing is making sure you're actually eligible for the grant. I can't tell you how many organizations have spent time even starting an application, building a relationship with a funder, diving deep on this, and then realizing that they're actually not eligible. So we want to make sure we do our due diligence, take our time to review the eligibility requirements. Now, I'm just curious to hear again from folks in the chat. How are you currently finding these potential grants or funders? I know folks have a lot of different ways they're looking for this information right now. Some of you may just be starting out on your grant strategy journey. Some of you may have grants in the pipeline. How are you finding out about those? Yeah, Preston says Google and word of mouth. Oh, that's so cool, Todd. Congratulations. Recently awarded a grant from LA County. I love that. I see Judith says Instrumentl. Love to see that. Yeah, Marianne says Google. Suzanne says previous grants and recommendations or contacts. Yeah, absolutely. Those networking moments that we're having, maybe through our board or through leadership, at conferences, at moments in the community where you might be connecting with a funder. Yeah, we've got Grant Station, research in the local area. I love all of these. Everyone in the room should be taking down all these ideas too, because all of these are valid ways to be finding potential funders, right? That's great. Keep them coming, folks. I'd love to see it. So I want to give a few suggestions of ways that you can discover and search for grants. And I'm going to highlight, a couple different avenues of which you can do so. Some of you have already mentioned those ideas in the chat box. I'm probably biased. I think one of the easiest ways is Instrumentl, and I'll show you how we do that with our matching algorithm. But there are alternatives out there that you can use if you're not ready to dive into Instrumentl as a platform. Some folks talked about using Google. I know I've heard of grant seekers at organizations setting up Google alerts to make sure they're aware of when a funder maybe posts an RFP or is mentioned in the news, so they can have conditional context if they're doing some sort of cold call or outreach to a funder. You can also scour those funder websites. You can use ChatGPT. I saw someone in there actually saying that, and even ask ChatGPT to look at a website for you and say, hey, this funder might have mission alignment or might be a good funder to pursue. You can dive deep on those 990 forms through GuideStar or the IRS. I know some of our pros in the room who maybe have been doing grant seeking for a long time are very familiar with those dense 990 forms. And while they are a lot to cover, they have a great wealth of information on all those stats that I was talking about on the other slide, things like past grantees, things like giving history. So we want to be able to use those. And I'll show you actually how Instrumentl pulls that 990 information for you. So it's a little easier to digest and you can see it year over year, which is kind of nicer than going through each PDF individually, right? And then there are, of course, other paid databases that you can use to dive deeper on some of the funders. So I'm really excited to do this. I want to do a live grant search with you all. And I actually pulled an example from one of the registrants in this room. I'm going to show you that just to make sure everyone can see. Did it switch over to my other screen here? I think we've got this website up, Community of Care. Awesome. Great. Thanks, Stephanie. So I'm using this nonprofit as a case study for you all. And I'm not sure if we have Kristen in the room from Community of Care, but I looked up their website and it looks like they're offering services for seniors, encouraging independent living, and also for folks with disabilities. So I took a look and just got a sense of maybe some of the programs they're looking to fund. And I set up a search in Instrumentl. So I'm going to go over to my window here. And I'm just going to show you really quickly how this project was set up. Essentially, what happens in Instrumentl is you're putting in all these different search functions when you set up your first project. And basically what I'm going through is I'm setting up the different things I'd like to see in my grant search. Now, this is specific to Instrumentl, but I would highlight that all of these fields that I'm filling out when I'm setting up a project here are applicable for anything that you're doing when you're searching for grants. You should have a sense of the types of applications that you want to see, right? Making sure they're eligible for, if you're nonprofits, or government entities, right? All of that. You also want to think about things like where your project serves, making sure that the things you're searching for are relevant to your geographic location. So for this example, I saw that they were serving Orange County, California. And so I specifically kind of called that out as an area of interest. And then this one is probably the most important aspect in Instrumentl, the fields of work. So I want to highlight that these are key terms that you can use. Again, if you're searching in Instrumentl or if you're even using a Google search, I kind of broke out these different categories of areas of funding that I want to be looking for. And so just based on the website, and if anyone from Community Care is here, you can correct me if some of these are not maybe what you'd be looking for, but I guessed that these might be categories of funding interest, things like aging, disability care and services, senior services. And so Instrumentl is using that to build the matching algorithm there. You also want to think about the size of the grant, right? You don't want to spend time applying to grants that are for $5,000 if your program needs at least 50, maybe even more, right? And that will depend on your organization and what you're planning on strategically kind of pursuing there. But we want to make sure we see the grants that are actually relevant. We also want to indicate what we will use the funds for. Now, this is super valuable as well. If you're looking at Form 990s, you'll actually be able to see past grantee examples in most Form 990s, and you'll be able to see what types of projects were funded. So for example, you might be really needing general operating funds. You want to make sure you can see evidence of that funder giving general operating funds in the past, right? That's an example where some funders will not give general operating. They want to give like programmatic support or education support, right? So we want to see examples here. And then lastly, I asked Instrumentl to find me funders from all of these different categories: associations, corporate, federal government, private, or state and local government. So that's how I kind of set up this project, just to give some context here. And then Instrumentl automatically does a match for all of these possible funding opportunities. That's what we call the grants that are in Instrumentl, these funding opportunity matches. Looks like it came up with 254 of those, 202 funder matches. So I'll be able to look through both of those and see which ones might be a good fit. Now I'm going to do a bit of an exercise with you all. I'm going to go through 2 examples here, and you're going to tell me in the chat if you think that this grant is a go or no go. And I'm going to start with this one right here. Based on what I've told you a little bit about the organization, this is the Changing Aging California-based grant. So in Instrumentl, you can see in the funding opportunity here, it gives me kind of a snapshot of what the opportunity looks like. It also even gives me a quick little 990 snapshot so I can get a sense of the funder as well. Down here, we've got the overview for the funding opportunity. So it looks like that this is designed to support economic opportunities for older adults. And one thing that I saw about this in particular, it says supporting aging in place. When I looked at this nonprofit, I said, oh, wow, aging in place. That's something actually that this nonprofit is literally looking to do right now. So I looked through again, looked through the eligibility here, right? It's giving me some indicators that, okay, 501c3, that's great. Just giving some quick ideas here if we're eligible or not. Oh, I see some ideas coming in the chat already. Let me know what you think if this is the right opportunity.
Rachel, just one moment.
Yeah.
Sonia, can you tell us, yes, Rachel is sharing a screen. Is anyone else having trouble seeing the screen? Okay, I see several people who can see it. Okay.
I'm assuming no means you can see it. Okay. Great.
Sonia, yes. So if you can't see the screen, what you should be seeing is the grants dashboard here. She's showing some of the grants that are possible matches for this organization. Okay, and if you have an issue, don't worry, the recording will definitely show this in case you missed it.
Thanks for checking on that, Amber.
Sure.
So before we decide if this is the right opportunity for us, we've looked at the RFP, the request for proposal. That's the portion of the actual opportunity that we're looking at, right? We also want to look at the funder and make sure there is alignment there. Remember those 6 key points I was showing you earlier. So if you go over in this tab in Instrumentl on each of these opportunities, you can see this is kind of some context for my history with the funder. But if you scroll down a little further, you'll see that we've basically taken all of the 990 forms, and this, we actually have a ton of historical data here that goes back to 2009 of all the information about this funder. So some initial things like contact information. I love this section of key people. Some of you talked about how important networking has been in building your funder kind of relationship pipeline. This is a great place to look and, maybe match on LinkedIn and see if you have a 3rd-degree connection, or share this list with your board or your boss and say, hey, does anyone have a connection with a director that's on this board at this foundation? You'll also see some of those key financial stats. These are the important things that you need to know about the foundation before you're considering applying, even if you're eligible for the grant. Things like the giving average and median, the number of grants that are being given year over year, just give you a sense of if they're kind of going to be in your ideal market for this. You can also look at the grant ranges, right? So for this project, I said I want things that are about 50K or above. It looks like it's a little bit lower, but the average amount is kind of around where I'm going for. So depending on your bandwidth, you might decide that this might be worth it. Another thing here is those past grantees, right? We talked about that. So I want to see evidence of giving in California. And while it doesn't look like the majority of their organizations are in California, I do see 8. And you can search in here. You can even do some comparisons on those nonprofits that received funding from the funder before and the purpose of the funding. Remember, I said I want to see evidence that they're giving for grants that actually align with what I would need, even if the organization is a good match, right? Some of the kind of last stats here that I find really valuable, this openness to new grantees. Are they giving to newer grantees year over year? And it looks like for this one, 34% of awards have gone to new grantees. That's pretty darn good. We say anything above 30% is going to be kind of a little less competitive. Under 30%, you're getting to a place where being a new grantee a little bit harder to get your foot in the door. And then lastly, some highlights here, giving by NTEE code. This is just another way that Instrumentl is essentially highlighting that, your organization, if you're kind of supporting human services, it looks like a lot of their giving is in this category. So what do we think? Do folks think that this opportunity might be something I should save and keep an eye on?
I saw some good responses in there. A couple people asked about if this was invite only, and if so, how would you approach that?
That's interesting. So it looks like some people notice this application cycle, right? And this one's interesting as well, because I'll highlight, it does have a predicted deadline. Now, we don't always know when exactly the next deadline is going to be. Maybe the RFP hasn't been posted for this coming cycle yet. And it looks like for this example, it hasn't. Instrumentl is using historical data to assess when they think the letter of inquiry might be due. And that's why it has this little squiggly line under here. Whenever you see this kind of crystal ball, that's Instrumentl guessing for you, right? And you can actually see that down here on this list as well. For invite only, this might require a little bit more, a little bit more initiative. I would say, let's see, people say yes, need an LOI. Yeah, I would say I'm definitely going to save this. I'm going to hold on to this, and I'm going to see if maybe there are other ways that I'm connected with this organization. Maybe after doing a little bit more research, I can look at those matching organizations that maybe there's one in my community who has received a grant from this funder before, and I could reach out to them and talk about their experience working with that funder. I actually have a whole blog article that I'll drop in the chat about how to approach invite-only funders. But yeah, I think this is one that I want to keep on my radar. It may not mean we end up applying. We might need to do a little more digging, and depending on our organization, if there's that connection there. But this is something I want to save. So just to show you how I'm doing that, I'm just writing a little note to myself, like save and keep an eye out for potential connections. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this to my tracker. So it's been saved. And just to highlight where that went, we were in the matches tab. It's over here in our tracker now. So that's our first grant that we've added to this projects tracker. This will mean I'll get notified if the LOI deadline changes, if anything changes at all with the RFP. And I can add some tasks. I can even add custom columns here if you have a different way you're tracking grants and you want to be able to see all those categories. Great way to kind of set up your tracker the way you want to. Now, that was some good insights there. And I saw some really interesting reflections in the chat of what you might do when you're looking through these opportunities. If that hadn't been invite only, I would have been like, oh my gosh, yeah, 100% we're applying that, right? But the invite only might be something we need to evaluate with our organization. I have one other example I want to show us. Just to see, this is, and all of this is going to depend on how you approach it with your organization as well. But I took a look at this one, the OL Wholesale Foundation grant. And a couple of key things. It looks like we have matches in Orange County. That's great. Looks like the fields of work, we have at least one exact match. We can do a quick little overview of this grant and see if this kind of works for what we need. Getting a sense, maybe, it's kind of hard to tell. It seems like maybe a little broader than what we are specifically providing, but let's look a little more closely at the funder. So again, we're able to see kind of their total assets, some information about the key people, they're giving year over year. It looks like their median grant range is a little lower than what we'd like. That's one thing that was kind of a red flag for me when I was looking at this one. It does look like they're giving in our state, right? Predominantly. So if you were outside of California, this would be probably a no-go, unless you're one of the two organizations that looks like they've given in New York in the past 10 years. Okay, so this is the one that actually gave me the most pause. In the most recent 3 years of data, 6% of awards have gone to new grantees. That's pretty darn competitive. I mean, I don't know, Amber, what you see with some of that, but that's kind of one of the lower ends of openness to new grantees that I've seen.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. So what do we think? Is this something we would save? Is this something we would pass on? Strong pass.
Strong pass.
I think this one is probably not a right fit, right? Unless maybe, for example, you looked at this and immediately you were like, oh, we actually like work with Morgan Roach all the time. We know her and she's, very involved or something. This would be a bit of a stretch and you might not want to spend time working for 15 grand when you actually need 50 and they have a very low likelihood of funding a new grantee. So you can hide this from the project so that you're like, I don't want to see that. One other thing I'll highlight there, that deadline for that grant was September 30th. So think like today's the 17th. Do you have even the capacity to apply for that grant, even if you felt like you would want to, right? So I'll pause there because I know I've gone a little farther on some things here, but Amber, did you want to kind of share any reflections from that live grant search before I move forward?
No, I think that's spot on. And we see the same types of questions that go into grant searches, but the ability to look that deeply at the 990s. I mean, I can tell you from personal experience how many hours I've spent just scouring 990s, trying to find the right page that the information is on. So that's so very helpful to be able to have that breakdown. We have so many questions in the Q&A. I'm really excited about that. But I know before we get to that, Rachel, you wanted to talk a little bit more about ROI of that grant search, right?
Yeah. So I want to remind us again, when I was doing that initial search, right? I was using some of this information that I had highlighted for you all before. We want to make sure we understand this. And if you're doing that in Instrumentl or not, you want to basically get as, detective hat on as you can with looking for potential funders. You want to see the mission. You want to understand those giving patterns. You want to see historical representation of your geographic area of focus, and you need to be eligible, right? A couple of other questions that you can ask yourself. I have these 5 questions for the RFP review. That's when you're looking at the funding opportunity. What's the grant maker's mission? Does it align with your initiatives, right? What are the specific goals of the grant RFP? Can you clearly identify those, and do they align with the project that you're looking for funding for? Do you meet their eligibility requirements? Again, one of the most important questions to be asking yourself. What's the size of grants being made? You saw me go through and look at the kind of median and average of grants being awarded, and you want to make sure it aligns with your budget needs. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth those 40 plus hours that you might spend writing that grant. And lastly, what type of grant is this opportunity for? When you look at past grantees and you see that it's a lot of education support or training for staff, and you're looking for things like general operating, right? That might not be aligned. Or you might see that there is alignment, and that's great as well. And then lastly, I have these 4 questions about funder giving history. So we want to see, are there at least 3 previously funded organizations that are similar to yours? It's a great marker just to check, like at least 3. That feels pretty good. Again, is your organization's geographic location represented? What percentage of those funded are new grantees? Instrumentl does a great job of just distilling that information for you. You can go through the 990s and see and compare year over year what that giving history looks like with grantees. And then for the last one here, has the funder been giving to more new grantees over time or more to repeat grantees? That'll just give you a sense too of what's your kind of likelihood of getting that foot in the door. So yeah, we want to see, is this grant worth our time to apply? So my last question here before we kind of go into Q&A for you all, these are probably some of the questions that we should always be asking ourselves. It's about our internal capacity, right? So at the end of the day, if everything lines up on all those other questions, you're like, yes, 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 it's looking great. We need to ask these 3 last questions. Do you have the bandwidth to take on this application? Big question mark, right? Can you meet the reporting requirements outlined by the funder? That's also a really big one. And we're legally required, right, to once we are awarded the grant to comply with the grant terms. So make sure you can actually do that part. And lastly, does this RFP have aspects where you could repurpose past grantee proposals or grant proposals? That'll just get you kind of even ahead of the process so that you can spend less time writing the grant and more time focused on pursuing all these potential opportunities. So I'll pause there. And I don't know, Amber, if you want me to switch back to your screen share or if you want me to just roll us to the end here, but I'll kind of let you moderate some of the Q&A we've got here.
Yeah, either way, I think you can see the questions as well, right?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, well, there's where to even begin. Is there one that stuck out to you that you'd like to start with?
Let me see here. I'm just looking through. There's so many great ones. Let's take a look.
I'm happy to pick one as well if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see where to start. I see actually there's 2 that are kind of related.
Okay.
Jerome had a question about are there grants specifically designed to support the initial setup costs of a new nonprofit organization, such as legal fees, incorporation, or infrastructure? And there was another one that was related to, yeah, okay, so Tamaya, are there many grants out there for nonprofits in the developing phase, like startup grants? So I'm going to like lump those 2 questions together and answer here. And Amber, I welcome you to share also any reflections you have on this. I think one important thing to remember if you are starting your initial grant searches and you are applying for grants for the first time is to make sure you are truly grant ready. That's where I would start, regardless of what you're looking for. And you might be an organization that is grant ready. There are a lot of grant readiness assessment tools out there. And I will drop one in the chat when I have a second here that we have on our website. But that is where I would start. Assess your organization for grant readiness because grants do take time. And Amber outlined a great number of reasons of why grants are beneficial, also why we need to consider the time it takes for them, the requirements for compliance, the person that needs to be responsible for gathering all of the information from finance, from your program teams, for doing the reports. So truly make sure you're grant ready. That being said, there are definitely grants for startups. You can actually indicate that those are the things you're looking for, like initial setup funds or infrastructure support, like capacity building is going to be that big category where you're maybe taking your organization from one level to the next. But I'll pause here so Amber can chime in as well.
Yeah, I will say, while there may be some out there, honestly, the fastest way I've seen people fundraise for brand new, like just starting, just filing your paperwork, et cetera, is to just get individual donations and to target those in your personal networks. If you can get 10 people to donate $100 each, that's going to cover a lot of your registration fees for filing as a nonprofit in the United States, for example. And grants, as Rachel is saying, being grant ready, sometimes you are able to be a bit more competitive with grants if you have that track record of success and show how the funding from a grant foundation is going to take you from where you are now, your status quo, to that next level of impact. So just a little bit of a disclaimer there on the very, very beginning startup part of nonprofits.
Absolutely. That's a great context there. I'm just dropping a few links in the chat because I saw some questions come up, but I'll move back to our Q&A box because there are so many questions. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to answer this one from Jennifer. Do you create a new program, or project in Instrumentl for each actual program you were asking for funding, or do you just have one profile and create one search? So it depends on what you're setting up for your your account. When you start a free trial in Instrumentl, you'll have access to the Pro plan, and that gives you a certain number of projects that you can create. The great thing about the projects is that they can get way more specific with your funding. And I would encourage you to start there, because you might have a program within your nonprofit that you're looking for specific, like maybe it's staff training or internal capacity building, right? And you want to make sure you're finding funding that's specific to that. Because Instrumentl's database is massive, there are almost 20,000 active RFPs currently in the database. It's a lot to sort through, right? So the projects just help you filter down and make sure that you're finding matches that are truly the best fit. That being said, you could do a more general project and have kind of like, I'm looking for funding for this, this, and this. You just might find that you'll spend a little more time sorting through those. So that's why I recommend setting up the project the way I'd highlighted with that one example. Let's see, I'm looking at a couple of other questions here. Yeah, Tom says, does this platform allow for grant management? Yes. So I showed you some of the prospecting tools there, but if we go back over to my tracker, that's actually where I'm going to see the management side. So you're going to be able to track the grants, make sure you can keep an eye on deadlines. I can even open this up and look a little bit more closely. This is kind of the pop-up window here, and I can look at any tasks that I have related to this. Say I want to add a task for the report is due or something. I'll put that in the report category. I can add the deadline of next Saturday. That would be a little extreme. And then I can assign someone, right? If I have other people on my grants team, I know some of us are one-person shows out there. More power to you, because I know that's a tough job. But if you do have support with your grants, you can assign collaborators, and they'll actually get a notification that that's something on their plate. Looking at other questions here.
There's so many.
I know.
I'm trying to keep up
Amber,
with
are
the
there
chat.
any standing out to you that you're like, oh my gosh, Rachel, you should definitely touch on this?
Yes, and just a quick note, a couple of you were asking about the trial, the free trial of Instrumentl. The link that we dropped in the chat should be for the 21-day. It's an extended free
That's
trial
correct.
that we wanted to do just for you all.
Yes.
So if you're seeing a 14-day one, you might be on the wrong link. So
and
use
I
the
will
link
say too, yeah, the 21-day trial is special just to Amber's crew. So we made that just for you. That it might still say 14 days because the way I set up the link, right, it enables that 3-week trial. But on the website, when you go to sign up, it might say try 14 days free. Just know if you click this specific link that I dropped in the chat, or the one that Amber dropped, and the one she'll be following up with the recording, that's the one that gets you the 21-day trial. And if anyone has trouble, if you were in this room, you can always reach out to me. I'll drop my email in the chat, and the way you can get in touch with our team. If you were like, hey, I'm supposed to have 3 weeks, you can just tell us. We will gladly extend. And there's no commitment. You can sign up. You don't even have to put a credit card down. It's literally just for you to explore the platform and do some of the digging that kind of we did today together.
Awesome. I am seeing a question that I know is on a lot of nonprofits' minds. This one's from Roberta, but I'm sure others have asked this too, is grants for overhead, capacity, infrastructure. So managers, administrators, accountants, etc. What do you think about that? Have you seen a lot of those available?
That's a great question. And I know that is sometimes the funding that is most necessary, right? But oftentimes we find funders want to have the splashy programmatic funding of, oh, I'm funding this volunteer program, or this is how many meals this funder was able to support, right? Sometimes the general operating is a little harder to come by, and there are maybe more restrictions for organizations applying for general operating. I've personally found that sometimes you have to be at a starting operating budget of a little higher than maybe some of our starting organizations are here, something like 200K or above. That's not to say they don't exist. And you can do a lot of digging in Instrumentl to just specifically filter that out. I can even show you how to do that. But it's definitely a tougher category of spend to look to alleviate with grants. And it might take a little more kind of intentional digging here. I don't know why it's not going back to my matches tab, but when it does work, I'll show you how I can do that. Okay. Yeah. So you could filter here. You can take a look and see if I only wanted to see grants that were for general operating expenses, I could just filter by that. And so you can take a quick look here. Again, you need to assess if these are actually the right opportunities. You still need to do a little bit of digging, but you can filter even more closely in Instrumentl.
Awesome. Jennifer, I'm just seeing your comment in the chat. Yes, there's a little thing under the 21 days free that says 14, referring to something totally different. It should still be a 21-day free trial, though. Maybe that's where the confusion is.
Yeah, it's honestly not great. I wish there was a way to edit that, but since you guys are getting this really special link, we almost never do a 21-day trial. So it doesn't update the website, but the link that you're using will automatically get you access to a 3-week trial. I made that link specifically for you all.
I do see a really interesting question in here. How do you determine the best NTEE code? For example,
that's a great question.
I don't know if you know this, but the example given here is we offer financial assistance for mental health services for children. So, they had a difficult time determining their first code that really fits.
Yeah, I mean, I will say some of it might take a little bit of trial and error. I know that when I was first diving into Instrumentl, I hadn't used that in my previous nonprofit organization. I was in the arts and culture sector. And as you probably all know, arts and culture as like an NTE code is also incredibly broad. So you might find that like you do searches based on that, and then you actually need to filter down even more closely to kind of narrow down your focus. But I would say try a couple. I mean, social services or human services will definitely follow probably into some of that category for this specific nonprofit, and see what comes up. See if those end up being kind of reliable sources. And if not, assessing other opportunities. You can take a look in here, and I'll actually remove this filter so we see more again. But if I want to look at a different, let's see, a different foundation or something, yeah, you can see like maybe you see a lot that come up with human services and that really fits your category, but maybe there's some other ones like philanthropy, volunteerism, or something that ends up also being aligned. I would kind of draft out for yourself which ones are most closely aligned with your organization's needs.
Here's another good one. What about an organization that has several branches across the United States? Would you recommend asking for grants for the overall umbrella organization, regional, each office, etc.?
That's a really great question. It might depend on your needs, to be totally honest. There's maybe going to be some needs that are regional specific, what types of program you're looking to fund. There are opportunities in Israel where you can look for kind of like national in scope funding. That does give you a little more flexibility as well. But I would encourage you to assess with when you're kind of doing that initial grant readiness assessment or grant, if you're prepping for that grant, making sure that the opportunity would actually serve the needs of each program. I really think it's dependent on the needs of the organization. I don't know, Amber, if you have kind of other thoughts there.
No, I mean, I think I agree with you.
Mm-hmm. It's tough to say, but there are definitely funders that are going to say, hey, yeah, we'll fund like 3 of your chapters or something, or all of your chapters, depending on what their kind of funding structure looks like. And if they're giving nationally and they're not maybe like super regionally tied, I'd say, yeah, go for that and see if that fits in with your grant plan for those programs.
Okay. Brenda asks, can we import a grant tracker or grant tracker data into Instrumentl?
That's such a great question. Yeah, you absolutely can. So you can see I only had this one grant here because I literally saved it with you all in real time. But you might want to add in all those past grants that you have saved. I'm sure many of us have Excel spreadsheets or different files that we're using, Google Sheets, Google Docs. So the way you would do that is you'd go over to your tracker and you'd import your grants spreadsheet. So this will prompt you to use a template. Basically, it'll just make sure that it aligns with the way the data is presented in Instrumentl so that you can kind of match it and it'll find those funders, help make sure that, if you import your grants historically in, that then it's tied with the data that we have attached to that funder in the Instrumentl database, if that makes sense. So you'd use that template and then you'd upload the spreadsheet. It usually takes like 48 hours, 72 hours or something like that to get it imported, because we do a manual review to make sure everything is looking peachy. And that's the way you can get all those historical grants in there.
Awesome. From Joel, I see, is there a particular purpose that you're seeing more grants available for, like technology needs, staffing needs, et cetera? I
Oh
know
my gosh, this
sometimes with
is such a
trends.
good question. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to drop a link to, we have these great Instrumentl insight reports. These are like brand new as of maybe like 3 weeks ago or something. And there is one that just came out about giving trends. So that one is just super helpful in getting a sense of, yeah, kind of where funds are being given. I do know that I think like research grants were maybe the biggest category of funds that were being administered, at least in 2023. But I'll drop a link to those reports in the chat so that you can check them out, and they are great. My colleague did a review of however many thousands of grant deadlines and grant causes that are in our database, and compiled a report for review there. So take a peek at those.
This is a really interesting, nuanced question from Jennifer. I'm curious what you think about this, Rachel. All right, Jennifer says, the organization we support is part of the school system. We function somewhat like a PTA for them. Some grantors don't want to give to organizations with connections to the government because they think that we're already fully funded. But this is
Mm.
not true. I know this intimately. My organization worked a lot with schools. We face this a lot too. Project Enlightenment needs additional funding to meet needs and expand to underserved geographical areas. Any thoughts for Jennifer?
Gosh, yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I think part of it, I have a couple of thoughts, and Amber, I'm curious, since you have personal experience with this, what might have worked well, kind of in your lived experience. I think part of it is thinking about the type of funder relationships we're building. So making sure that the funder truly understands our needs. If we're kind of cold calling funders and they don't necessarily have the background on our organization and what those needs truly are, if they're kind of writing us off from the get-go, maybe we need to do a little bit more interaction with that funder, or look for other funders that are going to give us the time of day to say, hey, this is really like, we truly do have this need and this is why, so that you're not kind of caught in that loop of people not necessarily giving you the full attention your organization deserves. So I think funder relationship building is probably the building block I personally would start with. But Amber, yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
I think that's definitely true. And Jennifer, if this Project Enlightenment is the one that I think it is in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina area, if that's the organization I'm thinking it is, building that relationship with funders that are well known in your local community, and then showcasing that partnership publicly on your public channels so that other funders can see that you have that social capital, that you have that established relationship. And if one funder understands that you need the funding, then they hopefully will follow suit too. You might look at John Rex Endowment if you're in the local area. They might have an interest in, I know that they work with causes that support young children. So that might be a good fit for you if you haven't already talked to them. All right, what did you think of the webinar? If you made it all the way through, I'd love to hear what your biggest takeaways were. I know that grants are always a bit more nuanced than people expect, so lots of learning to be had. As always, I hope you found this useful and valuable. Don't forget to check out the hundreds of other videos on my channel all about nonprofits, fundraising, social entrepreneurship, social issues, and more. And of course, don't forget to check out our new site, Changemaker Cafe, where, like I said, we have all of our content neatly organized so you can find exactly what you're looking for, as well as some other resources that might help you out. And my newsletter, Changemaker Mondays, where I send weekly tips and strategies out on your social impact work. Don't forget to subscribe to that. I'm gonna leave the link below this video. I'll see you next time for another video. Amber Melanie Smith signing off. Goodbye.